Hello, readers by eyes and by ears. This is Mari Chen, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. I hope you all are doing well today. We are continuing the reading of Thousand Autumns, Volume 5, also known as Qianqiu by Meng Xi Shi. And this is going to be a short video because I wanted to just keep the next two chapters grouped together alone, and that is Young Again Part 1 and Young Again Part 2. So without further ado, I hope you all enjoy. Young Again Part 1. Shiwu stood outside the door, hesitating over whether he should knock. By this time, Shitsuan should have long woken up, either to teach them the sword or to help them practice riding. Even when Sect Leader Yan had been there, that hadn't changed. The routine was never broken. Shunchao would never be like this. Shitsuan, are you awake? After standing there for a long time without hearing any noises from inside, Shiru grew a little worried despite himself, and he couldn't help but call out. There was a thump, followed by muffled noises. It sounded like somebody had fallen. Shiru hesitated no longer. He quickly pushed open the door and entered. Shitsun, are you all right? When he circled around the folding screen and saw the situation within the bedroom, the expression on his face, originally full of anxiety and worry, transformed into dumbfounded shock in an instant, so much that he couldn't even finish speaking. His shitsun wasn't on the bed, and beneath the bed, covered by clothes, it was only a struggling, flailing child? Who are you? Shiru blurted out. The child was only wearing a single layered shirt and a pair of pants. He seemed to be trying to put himself in Shitsun's clothing, though he ultimately failed. It was obvious that Shiru's arrival had frightened him quite a lot. He stared blankly at him for a moment, doing his best to appear calm and composed, but his crisp, childish voice exposed the tiny tremble within it. So it wasn't too effective. This one is Shunqiao. May I ask who this distinguished master might be? Where is this place? What? You're Shunqiao? Then where's my Shitsun? Shiru stared blankly back at him, and the two gazed at each other for a while, both at a loss. The child's body was still swamped in that oversized robe, and it was like he'd been fixed in place, for he didn't move a muscle. Last night, Shiru remembered very clearly that, since it'd been Qilang's birthday, everyone had been full of cheer. Shitsuan had specially asked for several dishes to be made at the foot of the mountain, then delivered up here. Everyone had drunk quite a bit of wine, only retiring after they'd thoroughly enjoyed themselves. Hence, everyone had woken up a little later than usual. However, Shunchao hadn't said that they could rest today, so Shiru, Yuan Song, and the rest still rose the way they usually did. But no matter how long they waited, Shunchao never showed up. Still, Shiru could have never predicted this kind of comical farce. He collected himself and took a couple of steps forward. The child hurriedly retreated a few steps, then ended up tripping on his robes, his entire body falling backward. Shiru nimbly reached out to grab the child, holding him in place. Don't be scared. I'm not a bad guy. I'm a disciple from Xuandu Mountain, Shiru. The child's eyes widened. You're also a disciple of Xuandu Mountain? How come I've never seen you before? Shiru skipped right over this question. Do you know where my Shitsun went? Who's your Shitsun? The Xuandu Mountain sect leader. The child's eyes grew even rounder. My Shitsun is also the Xuandu Mountain sect leader. My Shitsun is Shunqiao, said Shiru. I am Shunqiao, the child said, completely innocent. Shiru feebly held his forehead. Then who's your Shitsun? The child was young, but he wasn't stupid. You called yourself a disciple of Xuandu Mountain, so why wouldn't you know who my Shitsun is? A rather improbable idea slowly floated to Shiru's mind. Qifengge? The child's expression told Shiru that his answer was correct. Shiru wanted to cry, but he had no tears right now. He carefully asked, Then how old are you this year? For some reason, even though the child didn't recognize Shiru, he felt a kind of innate closeness toward him. I'm almost 7. So, he was only 6 years old. My God, my Shitsuan turned back into a 6-year-old overnight? Can he even return to normal? What if he can't? What will we do then? This thought struck Shiru like a bolt from the blue, and for a short time, He couldn't collect himself, but only stared dumbly at the child. Shiru had wondered before if this entire thing was just one enormous hoax. But, for one thing, his Schutzhund would never make this kind of joke. For another, with his Schutzhund's martial prowess, no one could have managed to kidnap his Schutzhund without notice. And for yet another thing, this child's face really did resemble his Schutzhund's by 7 or 8 parts out of 10. It was clear that this was a miniature version of his Schutzhund. Seeing that Shiru hadn't spoken for a very long time, little Shen Qiao panicked and yelled, "I'm going to go find Schutzhund!" And then he tried to run outside. Shiru hurried to stop him. Little Shen Qiao moved to attack, but as he currently was, he was far from being Shiru's match. A few seconds later, Shiru had sealed his acupoints. Little Shen Qiao was horrified to realize that, though he didn't recognize this person at all, his every move and stance indeed belonged to Xuandu Mountain. His little mouth pursed, and his eyes, like black grapes, quickly became glossy and moist. "I want to find my Schutzhund!" Shiru felt his nose tingle with the urge to cry. "I want my Schutzhund too! Give my Schutzhund back to me!" Little Shen Qiao was unable to reply. The news that the sect leader had transformed into a child quickly spread through the entirety of Xuandu Mountain. After everyone had faced the same emotional ups and downs as Shiru, they finally accepted this almost fantastical reality. Little Shen Qiao, however, was unable to accept it for now. He hugged the stuffed rabbit that Gu Hongbo had found on the mountain, his expression lost but innocent. Every time he opened his mouth, he'd ask for a Schutzhund. Otherwise, though, little Shen Qiao was unusually well behaved. He didn't cry or fuss, and he didn't require anyone to soothe him. Due to his extremely adorable appearance, other than finding the situation utterly unbelievable, everyone on Xuandu Mountain refused to pass over this chance to observe their sect leader as a child. They all found various excuses to show up in front of the little Shen Qiao and stroll around. They even brought him all sorts of presents. Of course, everyone was also racking their brains for a way to restore Shen Qiao to normal. The elders even tried channeling their internal energy into him. But strangely, little Shen Qiao's body was like a bottomless pit. Any true tea they poured into him was like mud sinking into the deep sea, vanishing without a trace. "Shurshu, why did your esteemed self go and find little Schutzhund a rabbit?" Shiru asked Gu Hongbo. "Did Schutzhund love rabbits as a child?" "When Su Shuxiong and I first entered the sect, our Shuxiong was already much older than he seems to be now, so his personality was completely different," she replied. "He could even teach us on Schutzhund's behalf, so naturally he wouldn't spend the entire day hugging stuffed animals. I only heard about this from Schutzhund myself, but his esteemed elder once gifted our Xiong with a stuffed rabbit, and our Xiong was ecstatic. He'd hold it even while sleeping." Not far off, little Shen Qiao was sitting quietly, his hand intermittently patting the large white rabbit. He saw that they were talking, but he only kept on watching curiously without interrupting them. But letting things continue like this really wasn't a solution. Shiru held his forehead and asked, "Does Shushu have any ideas?" Hesitant, Gu Hongbo said, "I've already sent Liuli Palace a letter of inquiry. Liuli Palace's disciples are incredibly knowledgeable, so perhaps they have a method. However, they're far away and beyond the sea, so we won't receive a reply for a while. Why don't we send a letter to Sect Leader Yan?" Yan Wushi had left the mountain for Chang'an only a couple days ago. Shiru didn't dare to imagine what his reaction to this incident might be. Would he fly into a rage and take it out on them? Shiru was trembling with fear a little, but the idea of his Schutzhund staying this way forever, unable to recover, terrified him even more. "I'll write a letter at once." Yan Wushi's reaction was not what they expected. Not at all. When he first saw little Shen Qiao, he too froze for a fair amount of time. But a grandmaster was a grandmaster after all. He quickly recovered his senses. If a person didn't cause this, perhaps it was just a chance occurrence, and he'll naturally return to normal when the time comes, he suggested. Shiru was dumbfounded. What if he doesn't return to normal? Yan Wushi glanced at him. Your Schutzhund has taught you for so long, and you're his eldest disciple, yet shouldering the sect's responsibility is too much for you? Shiru was ashamed. Thank you, Sect Leader Yan, for your instruction. Shiru understands. Yan Wushi sounded satisfied. He approached little Shenqiao. Naturally, little Shenqiao didn't recognize Yan Wushi. He watched as this handsome man strolled toward him, and his gaze was filled with the unusual weariness one should show strangers, but also a hint of curiosity. I'm Yan Wushi. He got straight to the point. Unexpectedly, little Shenqiao's eyes grew round. Shutsuan said that you fought him once, said little Shenqiao. That's right. Little Shenqiao canted his head and squinted at him, finding something a bit odd. But Shutsuan clearly said that Yan Wushi was a very young man. Am I not young? Said Yan Wushi. Have you forgotten? Who was complaining of the bed a couple of days ago that I had far too much energy and asked me to not take so long? He'd spoken these words practically right into little Shenqiao's ears. Shiwu didn't hear them. Bewilderment was written all over Shenqiao's face. He didn't understand at all. Yan Wushi suddenly thought that Shenqiao staying this way for a little while wouldn't be too bad. At least he was amusing and easy to trick. Once he recovered and recalled all of this, he'd probably try to crawl into a hole in the ground while blushing to his very ears. I'll take you down the mountain to play, said Yan Wushi. Little Shenqiao shook his head. I'm staying here. He hadn't seen anyone he was familiar with these past few days, but no matter what, he knew that this place was Xuandu Mountain and that the people on the mountain treated him well, without any malice to speak of. So, naturally, he was unwilling to go anywhere else. Yan Wushi smiled. That's not up to you. He wasn't like Shiwu or Gu Hengbo and the others, who'd spent half the day coaxing him with sweet words. Instead, he simply knocked Shenqiao unconscious. Shiwu was speechless at first, but seeing how Yan Wushi had picked up the boy, ready to leave, he quickly ran up to stop him. Sec Leader Yan, where are you taking Shutsuan? Yan Wushi swept him a glance. It's time for you to be tested. Don't betray your Shutsuan's efforts in teaching you. My venerable self will be taking him down the mountain for fun. Once he returns to normal, I'll bring him back. He was willing to offer Shiwu this explanation on account of Shenqiao. This was already a tremendous amount of favor to show him. Little Shenqiao had never imagined that he'd wake up to find himself no longer on Xuandu Mountain. He looked around at his unfamiliar surroundings, and combined with how he'd only just met Yan Wushi, panic and confusion immediately welled up inside him. In an instant, his eyes were shining with tears. Yan Wushi was well prepared. If you start crying, I won't take you back again. You know that I've fought your master before. I'm a bad person. Little Shenqiao forcibly held back his tears. He didn't dare cry, but he couldn't help retorting, Shutsuan didn't say that you were a bad person. He said that you had extraordinary aptitude and that you were certain to achieve great heights in your martial arts studies in the future. With how young little Shenqiao was, Yan Wushi hadn't expected the boy to be capable of maintaining such fluency of speech before someone like himself. He adored Shenqiao to a ridiculous degree, but this kind of adoration was usually expressed through teasing and bullying. The present was no exception. When he saw the little Shenqiao's eyes well with tears, Yan Wushi held him in his arms and said gently, "All right, I'm taking you elsewhere to play. I'll send you back in 2 days." Still holding back tears, Shenqiao tugged on Yan Wushi's sleeve, his face full of grievances. "Sec Leader Yan, can you take me to see Shutsuan? I miss him." "All right," said Yan Wushi. Little Shenqiao's expression immediately filled with joy. The radiance beaming out from his little face was practically visible to the naked eye. The two of them got off the carriage. They were in a marketplace. It was boisterous beyond comparison as people came and went. In the end, children were children. When there were fresh new things to look at, they temporarily forget their sorrows. Little Shenqiao looked left and right, his face filled with curiosity. Yan Wushi carried him to the Tangzhen stall. "How about we have him mold you a Shutsuan?" Shenqiao looked at the lifelike Tangzhen in all different colors and nodded joyfully. The peddler said, "What kind of person does this little gentleman want me to mold? How tall is he? What kinds of clothes does he wear?" Shenqiao earnestly gestured with his hands. "He is this tall, he likes wearing blue, he carries a sword on his back." The peddler was quick and skillful. Soon the Tangzhen was finished. "Look at this, little sir. Does this look like him?" Shenqiao nodded repeatedly, his eyes completely fixed on the Tangzhen. When it was placed into his hands, he clutched at it, completely unwilling to let go. Yan Wushi smiled. "I didn't lie to you, right?" Little Shunchao froze, and his small mouth hung slightly open. He looked at him, then looked at the Tongren. His eyebrows scrunched as he struggled with himself for a long time. He seemed deeply upset, but in the end, he swallowed it down again. Even Yan Wushi couldn't help but admire his self-restraint a little. After all, this wasn't a 10-year-old Shunchao, and certainly not a 15-year-old Shunchao. He wasn't even 7 years old, and he'd been suddenly transported into a foreign world within the span of a night. There wasn't a single familiar person around him, but he still managed to hold on to some basic sense. It was truly remarkable. But no matter how he endured, when little Shunchao's voice rang out again, it was slightly nasally. Sec Leader Yan, your esteemed self knows where my Shurtsun is, right? May I trouble you to help me find him? He's left you with me for now, said Yan Wushi. He'll naturally appear when the time is right. Someone as powerful as he is will never have any problems. His gentle consoling helped relieve some of little Shunchao's panic. The boy sniffled, then wrapped his arms around Yan Wushi's neck and nodded. But the next moment, Yan Wushi lowered his head and opened his mouth, then bit half the Tongren's shoulder right off. Little Shunchao was dumbfounded. Unable to take it anymore, he burst right into tears with a wail. Young Again Part 2. In an instant, many denouncing gazes landed on Yan Wushi from all directions, including from the peddler. He looked like such a proper gentleman, but to think he went as far as to steal a Tongren from a child. He'd even bitten off a huge piece of it. What child wouldn't cry? The peddler also had 2 daughters himself. Seeing Shunchao's reaction, his heart ached, and he quickly said, Uncle will mold you another one. Don't cry. Hearing this, little Shunchao really did stop crying and raised his sleeves to wipe at his tears. His voice was very nasally as he said, Thank you, Uncle. One is already enough. He looked again at his Shurtsun, who was now missing a shoulder, and he couldn't help but feel choked again. He quickly fought to hold back his tears, looking both pitiful and adorable. It was more than enough to move women overflowing with maternal instinct. Even the peddler couldn't help but want to mold him a few more Tongren to make him smile. Some passers-by were feeling indignant and wanted to rebuke Yan Wushi. But when they met his cold gaze, they were so intimidated by his aura that they swallowed down their words, too afraid to speak, and their faces flushed red. Yan Wushi said to little Shunchao, All right, I was only joking with you earlier. Let him mold you another one. You can give me the crippled Chifeng. Shurtsun isn't crippled, said little Shunchao angrily. You bit it off. Yan Wushi smiled. If you continue being so ferocious, I'll take you away and you'll never see your Chifeng again. Shurtsun. Little Shunchao pursed his lips as he struggled not to cry, his eyes filled with tears. I want Shurtsun! The emotions he'd repressed for so long spilled forth all at once, and Shunchao transformed right into a weeping mess. Now, even 10 Tongren wouldn't be able to silence him. Yan Wushi hugged the boy, his temples and the corners of his mouth twitching as he finally tasted distress, entirely by his own doing. For the first time, Sec Leader Yan, who'd always been the willful and unreasonable one, found himself completely helpless. If the person in his arms hadn't been Shunchao, he of course would have had 100 ways of getting them to shut up. But in his eyes, everything Shunchao did was adorable. It was just that Yan Wushi's method of expressing his adoration was different from everyone else's, and he'd also forgotten about the age gap between little Shunchao and the actual Shunchao. In a moment of carelessness, he'd gone overboard with the teasing. Everyone thought that Shunchao had become a child overnight, but in reality, that wasn't the case. Shunchao opened his eyes, then realized right away that something was off. True, there were soft blankets beneath him, and above his head were the familiar ceiling beams, but beyond the windows was pitch dark night, with a bright moon suspended high in the sky. There wasn't anything wrong with a dark night. What was wrong was that the 5 senses of all martial arts practitioners were incredibly sharp, and under normal circumstances, they'd never sink into such deep slumber. If his sleep had been deeper than usual, it should have been morning right now. He didn't need any candlelight. Using only the moonlight, Shunchao surveyed the room around him, then realized something strange. This place was indeed Xuandu Mountain, but instead of waking up where he was supposed to be living, he'd found himself in the house he'd lived in as a disciple. The feeling of strangeness grew stronger and stronger, but Shunchao wasn't little Shunchao after all. Though he was a bit disturbed, at the same time, a certain idea appeared within his heart. Was he dreaming about the past? As he considered this, he rose and pushed open the door, then walked outside. The night was silent. Shunchao raised his head to look at the sky, then left and right around him. What he saw instantly froze him in surprise. Currently, he was standing in the front area of a small building, and this small building was where Qifeng and his disciples had lived. After Shunchao had become sect leader, he was unwilling to continue occupying his Shitsuan's residence, and he'd moved to a nearby house instead. Right now, his surroundings were pitch black. The only exception was the faint light seeping from Shitsuan's old room. The candlelight swayed. It seemed someone was inside. Shunchao's heart pounded with emotion for a moment. He went up the stairs and slowly headed for the room where the candlelight shone. Even though it felt like a dream, he was also afraid of being disappointed by the dream. He made no attempt to hide the sound of his footsteps. The person in the room quickly discovered his presence. "Who's outside?" The other party didn't stand to open the door. His tone was casual and gentle, as if he were reading via the candlelight. It was tremendously familiar, something Shunchao had heard innumerable times. He was unable to control his quickening heartbeat. His eyes burned and his vision instantly blurred. "Who is it?" When the other party failed to hear a response, he thought it strange. Thus, he finally stood and came to open the door. The moment the door opened, the two men stood face to face, and the countenance that Shunchao had recalled countless times in his memories was now right before him. Shunchao's entire body seemed to have frozen in place. He couldn't move even half a step. He stared at the other man, unwilling to even blink. "You're..." Qifeng paused, then continued. "Who is this distinguished master? What business brings you to Xuandu Mountain?" At the time, Qifeng was in his prime. The hair at his temples was inky black. It seemed that he'd just bathed, for his hair was tied up, still damp. He wasn't an outstandingly handsome beauty. At most, one could call him somewhat good-looking, but his features were bright and confident. The polish of the ages, his abundant experience, as well as the breadth and depth of his knowledge and moral character, all imparted to him a share of indescribable charisma. If there was a type of person in this world with the power to make others trust him on sight, then that description would undoubtedly refer to Qifeng. Shunchao remembered very well the time when Shitsuan had failed to break through. Just as he was about to pass away where he was sitting, Shunchao had been ordered to go in and see him for the final time. By then, Qifeng had already lost the unchanging appearance that he'd maintained for several decades. Instead, his complexion had been ashen, his temples peppered with strands of frosty white. Even his gaze had turned dim and lifeless. Hence, when Shunchao once again saw Shitsuan as he'd been in the past, nostalgia and sorrow both suddenly surged within his heart. He could no longer control his tears. They rapidly brimmed over, streaming down his cheeks. "Shitsuan." Shunchao choked through sobs. Realizing that he was forgetting his manners, he quickly lowered his head and wiped away his tears before raising it again. "Shitsuan, this disciple is Shunchao. I'm the Shunchao from 20 years in the future. This disciple doesn't know what happened either. I woke up already back in the past. Perhaps by saying this, your esteemed self finds it inconceivable, but this disciple isn't harboring any ill intentions." "I believe you," said Qifeng. Shunchao's words cut off right there, and he stared at Qifeng with some surprise. Qifeng smiled. "I believe you, because even though you've grown bigger, your features are still the same, and there's the way you speak, the way you talk, along with all sorts of other things. Your old self is visible within all them. How could I fail to recognize you?" Then he extended a hand and gently patted Shunchao's head. "So, this is how Aichao looks once he's grown up." Shunchao only felt a momentary warmth upon his head, and he couldn't stop the choked feeling from returning once again. But what manner of divine occurrence is this? You said that you're Ah Chao from 20 years in the future. Then what happened to the 6-year-old Ah Chao? As expected of Qi Fengge, he'd gotten to the root of the situation right away. Shen Chao frowned. This disciple doesn't know either. I was meditating. Then I somehow fell asleep. When I woke up, I discovered that I'd gone back 20 years into the past. Qi Fengge seemed quite fascinated. Then where is this master 20 years in the future? Shen Chao was silent. Qi Fengge understood. I'm already dead by then. Shutsuan. Qi Fengge was amused. Birth, aging, illness, and death. These are all normal things. Martial arts practitioners may live longer, but their lifespans can't compare to that of the heavens. Why does Ah Chao make such an expression? Could it be that you've spent 20 years of growth in vain, seeing as you still can't move on from this? Shen Chao sucked in a deep breath. This disciple has received guidance. Who's the sect leader of Xuandu Mountain at that time? This disciple is. Qi Fengge didn't look particularly surprised. Instead, he smiled and nodded. Many events happened in between. It's a long story, said Shen Chao. Does Shutsuan want this disciple to give a detailed report? Qi Fengge shook his head. No need to say more. The things that should happen are already predestined. Knowing them gives no benefits, and it might even make things worse. An ordinary person who received the chance to learn about their future would find it impossible to curb their curiosity. But Shen Chao was unsurprised by Qi Fengge's answer. That was simply how wise and considerate his Shutsuan was. I'm not sure how long this divine occurrence can last, Qi Fengge said. This master has received such a rare chance in getting to meet a grown-up Ah Chao. But you can't waste all your time here. It's the Lantern Festival tonight, and your martial siblings have all gone down the mountain to play. Would you like to head down for a stroll as well? Of course this disciple is willing, said Shen Chao joyfully. The two of them descended the mountain, one behind the other. Qi Fengge used his qinggong, his figure drifting like a wandering immortal's. Shen Chao realized that in this dream, not only did everyone in his surroundings feel completely real to the touch, even his martial arts hadn't been diminished in the slightest. It really didn't feel like it was actually a dream. Qi Fengge had just stopped when he saw that Shen Chao was already standing next to him, and he couldn't conceal his pleasure. This disciple surpasses the master. Xuandu Mountain has a worthy successor. Shen Chao smiled. Shutsuan is too kind. My martial arts is still inferior to yours during your peak. Yan Wushi, however. Right after he spoke this name, he realized there seemed to be an inexplicable force restraining him, preventing him from talking about various things pertaining to the future. Qi Fengge didn't notice any peculiarities. Yan Wushi. It seems that in 20 years his strength will reach another level. Shen Chao found himself unable to elaborate, so he only nodded his head. Qi Fengge also didn't pursue the matter further. His gaze fell on the festive and noisy scene before them, the people coming and going. He smiled and asked, I trust that Xuandu Mountain will also be livelier 20 years in the future? Lanterns as far as the eye could see, in colors rich and varied. From time to time, the sound of children laughing and playing drifted over. It was truly an exuberant and lively lantern festival. I think it's about the same, said Shen Chao. He had already calmed down completely. It wasn't any hardship to be unable to talk about the future. Spending a night together with Shutsuan like this was already the greatest and happiest surprise. Qi Fengge brought them to a stall for guessing lantern riddles, where he joined in and answered a riddle correctly, winning a rabbit lantern in the process. Then he handed the rabbit lantern to Shen Chao, joking. When you came down the mountain last year, you also took a liking to this rabbit lantern. But Yuan Chuan wanted it too, so you let him have it. You didn't come down with him this year, so you're getting this rabbit lantern at quite a bargain. Shen Chao no longer remembered what had happened when he was 6, but he found the sincere and cherishing love Shutsuan showed him impossibly warm, and he clutched at the rabbit lantern, completely unwilling to let go. The candlelight shone from within the rabbit's belly, bringing with it a faint warmth. 20 years in the past and 20 years in the future, a living person and an icy tomb. Moisture welled up in Shen Chao's eyes, and, worried that Shutsuan would think him weak, he quickly blinked it away. Only then did he smile. Thank you, Shitsuin. Chifanga patted his shoulder, his gaze full of tender love. He didn't say anything, but he seemed to have understood everything. As they passed through the alleyway, the clamor and activity gradually quieted down. Before their eyes, the river gently flowed past. Many lanterns had been placed on paper boats, and they drifted down the upstream, the wishes and dreams of many all entrusted within them. The two rested beneath a tree for a while. Chifeng saw Shunchao still carrying the rabbit, unwilling to put it down. He couldn't help but smile. Why is my Achao still so childish when he's all grown up? Shunchao smiled as well. Because it's what Shitsuin gave me. Just looking at the lantern made him feel like Shitsuin was by his side, accompanying him. Shunchao didn't want to believe that this was only a dream, and perhaps the existence of this rabbit lantern could make his own existence feel more real. Chifeng took the lantern from him, then used a slender twig to draw out the wick inside. He made it a little longer so that it could burn for a little while longer as well. Then he returned the lantern to Shunchao. I'm sorry. Shunchao started. Why does Shitsuin say that? 20 years from now, you'll become the sect leader, said Shifeng gently. I trusted at that time you were the only one among all the disciples who could shoulder such a heavy burden. You're humble and kind by nature, and you dislike the limelight, so it was this master who pushed you into it. Shunchao laughed softly. I'm a Xuandu Mountain disciple. I wish for Xuandu Mountain to be peaceful, so if Shitsuin believes I can do well, I must devote all my efforts to do it as well. Though he'd taken a detour in the beginning and paid some horrifically heavy prices, in the end, he felt that he had not betrayed those expectations. The two of them chatted beneath the tree for a long time. Shunchao couldn't remember when, but he'd grown tired and ended up falling asleep. In his dream, his head rested on Tifeng's thigh, and held in his arms still was the rabbit lantern, already extinguished. A small smile was on his lips. One hand gently patted his head over and over again, just like it had when he was a child. Shunchao was awakened by the piercing ray of sunlight. He opened his eyes. Sunlight was pouring down between the cracks of the foliage, dappling his body. There was another person next to him, leaning against the tree trunk. Yet it wasn't Tifeng, but Yan Wushi. Yan Wushi opened his eyes and rubbed his temples. He was preoccupied with trying to work out why, even with his martial prowess, he couldn't remember when he'd fallen asleep. But when he saw Shunchao, he jolted slightly. You're back. The two of them compared their tales down to the tiniest details. Shunchao suddenly realized that it might not have been a dream, but that he'd truly switched places with the 7-year-old Shunchao for a short while and returned to the past. But I don't remember having any memory of this when I was 6, he said. Perhaps because it happened in the past, said Yan Wushi. That's why your old self naturally forgot everything. Shunchao thought hard about it some more. It seemed that this was the only possible answer. Yan Wushi suddenly bent at the waist to lean over. With most of his upper body pressed on top of Shunchao's, he reached over to pull something out from behind him. Shunchao looked. To his surprise, it was the rabbit lantern. Okay, everyone. So this, like I said, was a short, sweet little video for the young agains. I don't really have much to say except for Yan Wushi, him making Shunchao cry because he was bullying him like he would the adult one, and then like having a little bit of regret was that was funny. I also thought it was nice that Shunchao got to spend some time with his Shitsuin, but as an adult. That was really sweet. Also, I know that the book described him as not, like super handsome, but just moderately good looking, essentially. But the picture that they have within the volume makes his Shitsuin look kind of handsome. Anyway, there's nothing left to say. I'll see you guys next time. Well, Niman.